Less than a month after Lincoln took office, Fort Sumter fell to the Confederates.
Abraham Lincoln issues a call for federal troops to put down what he now is referring to as a rebellion. Civil War is underway. And, it's like this rock rolling downhill.
In late 1861, the Union regained control of some of the sea islands that stretched along the South Carolina coast.
Robert Smalls could have seen the Union fleet offshore. Throughout the war, the Union fleet was visible from Charleston Harbor. So the sense of the impending possibility for freedom was in the mind of all of the slaves of the Low Country.
When the war began, Robert Smalls' ship was called into Confederate service, and he was forced to continue working on board.
So for a year, he was fighting with the Confederacy against the Union. They laid mines in the harbor, they carried ammunition from one place to another, they carried troops, they were fighting a war. Smalls figured that he was fighting the war on the wrong side. Smalls and his wife had been talking about freedom for a long time. And Smalls began to speak with some of the other black men who were working with him on the ship. They began to talk about how to escape.
One night, the enslaved crewmen of the Planter dared meet at Smalls' apartment to finalize their escape plans. They went over the scheme in detail.
They decided that they would, in the wee hours of the morning, they would load the members of their families on the vessel and sail it out then into the harbor and beyond the Confederate battle stations, taking a tremendous risk.
One man said, I'm not afraid of any of this for myself, but I'm afraid of what they will do to my wife and family back here if I participate. Smalls was very generous. He said, okay, on the condition that you not tell anybody about our secret, we'll let you go. So they let the man go. And then he said, this is very dangerous and we may be captured by the Confederates. And if they capture us, they will put us to death. So he said to them, I suggest that in case we are captured, we set dynamite to the boiler on the ship and blow it up, blowing up ourselves at the same time. Better, he said, to take our lives into our own hands than to turn ourselves over to the Confederates. They all agreed.
On the night of May 13, 1862, as they often did, the Confederate crew went home and left the black crew on board to guard the ship. This night, conditions were right. The Planter had just been loaded with ammunition, more than enough to blow it up if necessary. With their families huddled below, the Planter, with Robert Smalls impersonating the captain, approached Fort Sumter. He gave the signal and was allowed to pass.
And then the sentry on the Fort Sumter noticed that the boat had sped up, and he thought that was funny. So he called to the boat to halt. But by now, Smalls was out of the range of the Confederate fire, and so he didn't stop. But now he was in real trouble because he was headed toward the Union fleet, although he was sailing toward them to deliver the ship to them, and they did not know he was coming. So what to do? Well, apparently, Hannah, his wife, had brought a white bed sheet along. So Smalls ordered his men to take down the Confederate flag, take down the state of South Carolina flag, and put this white bed sheet up on the flagpole, which they did.
The Union naval blockade didn't fire on the ship and did allow it to come into its midst, and was very surprised to see this Confederate vessel now in the possession of enslaved African Americans who turned it over to them.
Smalls stepped up and said to the Union ship, "Captain, I'm Robert Smalls. I brought you the Planter. I thought it might be of some use to Uncle Abe." That's how the Planter became a Union ship and Smalls became free.
Robert Smalls' capture of the Planter was a sensation. It was reported from New York to London.
Robert Smalls very quickly became a major celebrity. Lots of slaves escaped during the Civil War. None of them escaped with as much enterprise or with as much Confederate property in their possession as Robert Smalls and the crew of the Planter.
The Union Navy quickly learned that they were getting much more than just a new ship.
When Smalls was taken into Union custody and debriefed, they were overjoyed. They knew that the ship was valuable, and as they debriefed Smalls, they learned how much he knew about the Confederate defenses, and that was even more valuable than the ship.
Robert Smalls really challenged the whole theoretical basis of slavery, because here was someone who was intelligent enough, who was courageous enough, who was confident enough to engineer really this dramatic and extraordinary escape right out from under the noses of the superior race. So there's this feeling that there has to be some sort of retribution for that, and so the state of South Carolina actually places a $50,000 bounty on his head.
The bounty did not frighten Smalls. He was prepared to fight and joined the Union Navy as a non-commissioned pilot. As the war entered its second year, most Southern white men had been called into the Army. Many of the enslaved took this opportunity to flee.
It clearly revealed that without the patrol system in the South, which basically dissipated when the war started, there was nothing to restrain them and keep them from running away. And so as a result, they ran away by the hundreds and then eventually by the thousands.
As thousands of escaped slaves made it to Union lines, some field commanders put them to work in non-combat jobs. Unlike the Navy, which had a few African American sailors, the Army would not permit blacks to fight.
From Lincoln's perspective, or from the perspective of most Northerners, this is a white man's war for Union. This war has nothing to do with slavery, and it has nothing to do with black people.
From the time he took office, Lincoln's policy was focused on keeping the 4 slave-owning border states in the Union. Lincoln believed that without Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, the North was doomed. "I hope God is on our side," the president told a reporter, "but I must have Kentucky."
In fact, there's this very interesting conversation between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, in which Frederick Douglass says that you're fighting this war with a strong right hand behind your back. Even though you're concerned about maintaining the loyalty of the border states, the United States would be better off to accept the service of thousands, tens of thousands of African American troops.
And by 1862, the relentless movement of fleeing slaves into Union lines and their insistent demand to be allowed to fight made the issue unavoidable. In August, the Federal War Department authorized mustering an army of 5,000 black men in South Carolina. Robert Smalls volunteered to help recruit the 1st South Carolina Colored Troops. Within the year, black regiments were being created all across the Union. The response was overwhelming.
Wherever it's possible, you have masses of men volunteering for the Army. It's people all over the North coming to Massachusetts to volunteer for the Massachusetts 54 and 55th, in South Carolina for the 1st Colored Infantry.
Now officially allowed to fight, they had to fight not only the Confederate Army, they had to fight within the Union ranks as well. Racism was rampant. At first, black soldiers received only half pay, but still